Hello, everyone. I just wanted to preface this show with a bit of a, I guess, warning. I don't know. No, that's too dire sounding. Just a note that the recording of this episode took place over a week in different moments of available silence when it presented itself, amidst also my own various moments of self-doubt and I don't know, I guess, for lack of a better word, depression, but I hate that word because it's so loaded. But just various moments where I stopped and I asked myself, what the hell are you doing? Who cares about this shit? Nobody gives a hell. But you know what? Some people actually listen. So that's good. I may be shooting myself in the foot to a degree here, but I would like to reach 500 subscribers. That's my goal. I think I'm about to break 150 on YouTube. I'm about 75 on Spotify. So if you're listening, if you enjoy, if you learn something or pick something up, please tell your friends, share, recommend, like, and subscribe. And hopefully we'll get there, like within the next year. I'm going to set it at a year limit. That's probably being generous, but we'll see. We can do this together. So once again, I just want to thank everyone for listening. I appreciate the ever-living hell out of you guys. It warms my heart to the very cockles of my being that you guys listen and are interested. Really appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. Enjoy the show.
Bye!
I'm an Indian, and you're a pilgrim. Let's all sit down together and smile real big for the cameras. Because this happened. It must have happened if they taught it to me in elementary school. Oh boy. Alright. Yeah, levels are good. Thumbs up, kitty cat. Hey everybody, welcome to this special edition, Thanksgiving style, of Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht. And this episode, we're going to be discussing the life and work of one Reverend Robert Kirk. Kirk's work. Before we get into the show, though, I just want to say real quick, my buddy, brother, friend, and occasional co-host of the podcast, Mr. Lowry, is facing some tough times right now. I just want the audience to, if they can, take a little time out, send a few positive vibes his way, a few FUs to the world, to force it to bend and conform to his will, help him out in these trying times. I also, while I'm thinking about it, I'm looking at a Beanie Baby I received from a coworker a while back, years ago actually now, but just made me think, Lois, I hope you're alive. And if you are alive, I hope you're doing well. And if you're doing well, I hope you're listening to the show. Before we jump into this episode, which technically counts as both an installment of our ultra-terrestrial overlords, as well as a bit of a precursor into the upcoming multi-part series I'm fixing to jump into. At least I think that's how it's going to work. This multi-part series coming up. It's it's kind of a tough one to parse out in certain sections. Not quite sure how to come at certain angles on some of it. So as far as I know, off the top of my head so far, as everything stands, it is going to be a multi-part series. But yes, today's episode on the Reverend Robert Kirk is sort of a primer, if you will, before we jump into that. I'm just going to go ahead and say what it is now. The multi-part series is going to entail various information and angles on human sexual relations with non-human entities. Just for the record, not bestiality. So I have to clarify that. History, folklore, conspiracy, biology. Gonna cover just about as much as I can on it. It's a strange topic, and it's very ingrained into much of the both ancient, well, relatively ancient, and modern folklore concerning fairies, which we'll be talking about today, but also aliens. It's technically the central crux, if you will, of the biggest religion in the world. That's right, Christianity. That a woman and a non-human entity
Got it on. Woo!
and had a hybrid child. And hybrid offspring is going to be another major focal point of the series. So, but like I said, today's episode, Reverend Robert Kirk, this is going to lay some of the groundwork for much of what we'll be getting into in the multi-part series. So I wanted to get this out first, trying to think like a showrunner. But before we get into all of this, as per usual, a quick word from our sponsors. You know, it's Thanksgiving time, and it's a time for family. And generally, a time for family, if your family is anything like mine, it's also a time for drinking. Times for drinking can also mean times for hangover. At least, if you're old-fashioned. Things have changed, my friends. Now, we've got brand spanking new inventions, like this thing called liqueur, Liquure. Liqueur gummies combine DHM, milk thistle, B vitamins, and ginger root to help your body recover after drinking. They fight fatigue, or fatigue if you're so inclined, nausea, and dehydration, so you wake up feeling refreshed. Try them for faster recovery and enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON, ICON, at liqueur.com, LIQURE.com, for 20% off. 20% off any product. Exclusively through Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. Brilliant! You know, it's Thanksgiving time, and Thanksgiving time is a time for family. And if your family's anything like my family, you're going to need something to really chill everyone out. Maybe yourself. Maybe get a little anxious when all these people are in a room together. Everyone's got the best idea for how to cook the turkey. But you know what? It's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. Because you got Shimmerwood beverages. Shimmerwood's award-winning CBD seltzers combine full-spectrum CBD with natural fruit shrubs, delivering a refreshing, stress-relieving drink that eases tension and promotes relaxation. Enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON at shimmerwood.com for 30% off. 30% off any product. Exclusively through Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. Brilliant! So, the Right Honorable Reverend Bob Kirk. Robert Kirk. I don't think people were calling Roberts Bobs just yet at this particular point in history. The 1600s. That's the 17th century. I know it's confusing. It gets me every time, but you gotta add one because of the zeros. Does that make sense? I'll stop talking about time and math now. Let's get into old Bobby Kirk here. Reverend Bobby Kirk. There are stories that behave like a living thing. An organism, I believe, is the correct word. It covers a lot of bases. Stories that lie dormant for decades, sometimes even centuries, until a particular moment in history revives them, until a particular individual in a particular moment in history revitalizes them. Stories that cling to a landscape, that echo through a culture, that refuse to die. They walk among us. And every so often, one of those stories attaches itself to an individual so completely that the boundary between biography and folklore dissolves. And this episode is about one such man. In the Scottish parish of Aberfoyle, on the edge of the Trossachs. And while I'm thinking about it, Trossachs just reminded me, there's going to be a lot of potential Welsh and Gaelic language in this episode. And I'm letting you know now, none of it is going to be right, I don't think. We'll try. We'll try. But yes, on the edge of the Trossachs, there's a small grassy hill locals call the Doon Hill. D-O-O-N. 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 Doon Hill. It's an unassuming place. Green, quiet. Its slopes started with oaks and rowan trees whose branches now carry hundreds of ribbons and charms left by modern-day pilgrims. It's known as the Fairy No, the hill of the good people. Now, this word no, K-N-O-W-E, I've also heard it pronounced no, and it means like a hill. So, once again, this is all coming from primarily Scotland, which is the native land of Reverend Robert Kirk. But the fairy lore dips into the Nordic clans, the Welsh, British, etc. So, I guess try to come up with a Scottish apology.
Look, I just want to apologise for what I did to your countrymen.
You said some pretty nasty things.
It was here in 1692 that a minister named Reverend Robert Kirk walked one evening and, as the local lore insists, never returned. His body was found, they say, or perhaps it wasn't. Stories disagree. What everyone agrees on is that there is one whispered conclusion. Kirk was taken by the very beings he had spent his life studying, taken for revealing too much. Revelation of the method. Taken for trespassing in realms where scholars aren't welcome. Tonight we travel into Kirk's world, not merely the biography of a minister, but a window into the oldest stratum of the European imagination. A world where fairies are not tiny winged sprites, but a parallel race of intelligent, supernatural beings. A world that bridges ancient Celtic religion and the modern study of the paranormal. A world that anticipates Jacques Vallée, John Keel, and the entire ultra-terrestrial spectrum of UFO research by nearly 300 years. And in the end, we will follow the strange trail leading from Kirk to another visionary researcher. Centuries later, a man drawn to another sacred hill, Glastonbury Tor, whose own strange death mirrors Kirk's in many very uncanny ways. But before we get there, we start with the life of the minister who gave the world one of the most mysterious texts in all of folklore and burgeoning field known as psychical research. A little book called The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. Now, I'm sure everyone knows what elves and fairies are. Fauns are like those little goat man guys. Little weird goat man, you know?
It's the Goat Man!
Robert Kirk was born in 1644 in Aberfoyle, a gateway parish between the Highlands and the Lowlands of Scotland. The perfect liminal landscape for a man destined to cross thresholds. The seventh son of a seventh son. He was steeped from birth and a numerological distinction common to Celtic folklore. Seventh sons were believed to possess second sight. I know the math is daunting, but we'll get through this together. It's an innate clairvoyance, an ability to perceive the hidden layers of reality. Some say it also comes with the gift of healing, sometimes the gift of tongues. Use your imaginations, folks. Whether Kirk himself believed this or whether others simply projected this onto him is hard to say, but the motif follows him throughout his life. Educated at St. Andrews and later in Edinburgh, Kirk became fluent in Gaelic and deeply versed in Highland lore. In 1681, he published a metrical translation of the Psalms of the Bible, of Bible infamy, into Gaelic, a work that earned him modest praise. But it was his other interest, his obsession really, that would immortalize him. Kirk was fascinated by the belief systems of the Highlanders. There can be only one. Under his ministry. Their accounts of second sight, prophetic dreams, the wandering dead, and above all, the good folk, the kindly people, the Gentry, the race of beings who lived beneath the hills, inside the mounds, and in the liminal spaces of forests and mountains. Rather than dismissing these stories as superstitions, Kirk approached them like an early anthropologist would, or perhaps a precursor to the psychical researchers of the 19th century. He took detailed notes from informants, cross-referenced stories, compared motifs, built classifications even. His approach was not unlike that of Samuel Pepys. I believe that's how you say it. Quick interjection from the future. It's actually pronounced Pepys. But you don't say it Pepys because it's British-ish. So you say it all one thing fast, like Pepys. But it comes out like Peeps. So it's actually Samuel Pepys. Peep that. Joseph Glanville and Robert Boyle, contemporaries who, though now remembered as intellectuals of the English Enlightenment, were in fact deeply invested in investigating witchcraft, apparitions, poltergeists, and quote-unquote matters preternatural. In fact, Glanville's Sadducismus Triumphatus. Hello, interjection from the future again. Going to be a lot of these this episode. That's because I've had to record this in bits and pieces, left and right, all over the place throughout the holiday break. So if you hear me say Thanksgiving, just tack on a day or two, etc. Why did I do this? Oh, yes. Sadducismus Triumphatus translates to Triumph of the Sadducees. Those guys from the Bible. This is another bit of a hot take from a religious scholar who believes that materialism and atheism are on the rise in the 1600s. And scientifically speaking, especially due to the materialist basis of the scientific worldview. Defense of spirits and demonology circulated widely in learned circles and is anatomically similar to Kirk's later work. Rational in tone, yet utterly committed to accepting that unseen beings shared our world. In fact, many in this circle viewed that promotion of paranormal ideas stood as a bulwark of sorts against atheism and materialism. In this milieu, Kirk's project was not unusual, but his conclusions were. Completed in 1691, though not published until 1815, the Secret Commonwealth is one of the strangest documents of the early modern period. It's not a storybook, nor a collection of fairy tales, but a sober, methodical catalog of an unseen race, written as if the author were describing a neighboring tribe. Kirk describes the Fae, or Fairy, or Elves, whichever term you prefer, not as spirits, but as a parallel species, a race of quote-unquote subterraneans, whose nature straddles the boundary between physical and spiritual. They possess bodies of quote-unquote congealed air, subtler than ours, but substantial in their own dimension. They farm, hunt, marry, and wage war. They maintain strict laws, hierarchies, and moral codes of their own. They move silently, swiftly, and seem to inhabit a vibrational frequency adjacent to ours, a world that overlaps ours, sometimes fully visible to those with second sight, sometimes only partially perceived. Kirk's descriptions are startlingly modern. He speaks of altered states of perception, shifting dimensions, aerial vehicles, i.e., the quote-unquote trooping host seen gliding above the land. He talks of abductions, time loss, hybrid children, parallel ecosystems, liminal gateways found in hills and mounds. In certain places, the Secret Commonwealth reads like a 17th century version of Passport to Magonia, predicting Valet, always get it confused, predicting Valet by hundreds of years. But the most striking passages concern light. Kirk repeatedly emphasizes that the fairy race is luminous, radiant, subtle, and able to shift visibility by controlling their quote-unquote etheric bodies, which also harkens back to Riley Crabb and Meade Lane of the Borderland Sciences Research Foundation. This brings his work closer to mystical physics than folklore. To quote a brief excerpt, quote, "These she," which is another term for fairies, or fairies, as they call the Sliagmite, way off, probably getting that wrong, or the good people, are said to inhabit the air and earth with bodies like men and women, yet of a finer nature, who can appear or disappear at their pleasure, unquote. It's difficult to overstate how unusual this is for 1691. Kirk is not collecting stories, he's describing a cosmology, a hidden civilization, a secret commonwealth. And it was this project, according to legend, that may have cost him his life. On the 14th day of May, 1692, Robert Kirk left his manse in Aberfoyle and walked up to the slope of the Doon Hill, his customary evening route. The reason for his walk is unknown. Some say he was clearing his mind after days spent editing the manuscript. Others say he often visited the hill precisely because it was known to be a place where the good people gathered. The truth, like everything in Kirk's life, is suspended between the mundane and the mythical. What happened next depends entirely on which story you choose to believe. According to the parish records, Kirk collapsed suddenly and died on the hillside. A heart failure, they said. He was buried in the churchyard of Aberfoyle, where a headstone still stands. But the locals told it differently. They said he didn't die at all. They said he was taken. Taken by the very beings he had written about. Carried into the hill as punishment for revealing the secrets of their world. His body, they insisted, was a glamour, a decoy, a simulacra. The man himself had been spirited away. The legend deepened after the funeral. According to the most enduring version, Kirk appeared as a phantom to his cousin, Graham of Dutray, I think that's how you say it, revealing that he was imprisoned in the fairy realm and could be freed only during the baptism of his posthumous child. Kirk instructed him, quote, "Cast a dirk over my apparition, and the bond will be broken." A dirk is a dagger, by the way. Graham agreed. The day of the baptism came. Kirk appeared, exactly as promised, but Graham froze. The dirk never left his hand. The apparition vanished forever. The minister of Aberfoyle was gone. The story became so entrenched in local culture that Sir Walter Scott recorded it. Later folklorists preserved it. And to this day, visitors tie ribbons to the branches of the Doon Hills trees, hoping for mercy or favor from the good people. Some leave gifts for Kirk himself, believing he still walks beneath the roots. Whether this story is supernatural, symbolic, or simply grief reframed as folklore, one thing is certain. Kirk's death became inseparable from his work. His disappearance is treated not as an ending, but as the final chapter of the Secret Commonwealth. The scholar who studied the Fae became a Fae legend himself. The idea of an unseen race, neighbors, rivals, seducers, or predators exists in every culture on Earth. It appears so consistently with such thematic overlap that folklorists have long suspected a psychological or anthropological root. Paranormal researchers, on the other hand, wonder whether this global ubiquity could be evidence of something literal. Before we begin our world tour, that's right, going on a world tour, let's establish some of the universal patterns that pop up. Across cultures, the unseen race typically shares a gallery of traits. They are humanoid, but not human. Slender, luminous, pale, animalistic, fiery, amphibian, or shadowy, always adjacent to human form, never identical. They possess advanced knowledge or power, magic, psychic influence, control over the weather, illness, fertility, or fate, superior craftsmanship, manipulation of time, and the like. They inhabit liminal spaces, mountains, forests, oceans, deserts, burial mounds, caves, abandoned structures, anywhere at the border of the human world. They can appear and vanish at will, often connected to shifts in perception, dreams, trance states, or certain environmental cues like fog, moonlight, or even sleep paralysis. They enforce strict rules about human interaction. Don't eat their food. Don't give them your name. Do not speak first. Do not look back. Do not trespass. Do not take their gifts. Do not break taboos. They often abduct or seduce humans, sometimes to breed, sometimes for municipal government jobs, so it would seem, sometimes for nourishment, physical or psychic. Those who break the rules suffer the consequences: madness, misfortune, illness, disappearance, or being taken permanently. They're neither angels nor demons, but something in between. Not wholly benevolent, nor wholly malevolent. They respond to respect, reciprocity, and protocol. This monomyth is so consistent worldwide that modern researchers, from Jacques Vallée to Patrick Harper of Daimonic Reality, suspect we are dealing with something deeper than folklore, a stable, long-term phenomenon manifesting through cultural language. Robert Kirk was among the first Western scholars to treat the unseen race as a literal, parallel civilization, but he was not the last. Now we travel across the globe through stories that echo Kirk's Secret Commonwealth, but with regional variations, local dangers, and distinct etiquette for survival. Each section includes both lore and field guidelines, ancestral knowledge meant to keep you alive if you ever find yourself crossing paths with beings who do not share the human frame. In Iceland, they have the Huldufolk, or hidden people. In Icelandic belief, the Huldufolk live inside rocks, hills, lava fields, and cliffs. They look human, but are taller, more graceful, more luminous, and they guard their territories aggressively. If you break their rules, well, road crews who attempted to dynamite certain boulders had repeatedly encountered broken machinery, sudden storms, workers falling ill, tools disappearing, equipment malfunctions beyond explanation. In one famous case, the Icelandic government diverted an entire highway to avoid disturbing an elf stone. And even today, contractors consult elf specialists before any major construction project. There's etiquette and defense, of course. Do not disturb a solitary boulder. Never urinate outdoors after sunset. Pre-dusk hours is fine. Always acknowledge their presence politely. Leave offerings, bread, milk, coins. Avoid whistling near cliffs. It's considered a challenge. As a matter of fact, whistling shows up in quite a lot of this global folklore. In Ireland and Scotland, you have the Owl She and the fairy host. The Irish Fae are not whimsical. This is the Gentry. They're a proud warrior race,
Like Klingons.
descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, driven underground after losing Ireland to mortal invaders. And their mounds are portals. Their music is intoxicating, and their laws are absolute. To break a fairy taboo is to invite catastrophe. Farmers who cut down trees, solitary and thorned, suffer crop blights, livestock deaths, and financial ruin. John DeLorean famously diverted an entire factory plan rather than bulldoze a fairy tree on his company's land. Still didn't work out too well for him, though. Those who accept fairy food are trapped for years or eternally. And those who look back when fleeing are taken. Iron is protective. Salt disrupts their magic. Never step in or on a fairy fort. Do not eat or drink their food. If offered a gift, decline respectfully. In Scandinavia, you have the Elverfolk and the Huldra. These beings seduce humans, sometimes lovingly, sometimes in a predatory fashion. The Huldra is a woodland woman of breathtaking beauty, until you notice her bark skin or hollow back. Ugh. Consequences of breaking the rules are many. Men who lay with a Huldra without fulfilling ritual obligation risk madness, paralysis, disappearance, being forced into servitude in the hidden realm. Huldra marriage can be beneficial if done properly. If not, it ends in tragedy. Basically, you got to make a climax, or else. Once again, there's certain etiquette to follow. Never accept a dance without offering a gift. If you hear music in the forest at night, don't follow it. Keep your pockets filled with iron, bread, or steel. In Japan, there's the yokai, mountain spirits, and kitsune, fox spirit shapeshifters. The Japanese unseen race includes these fox spirits, mountain gods, drowned ghosts, and shape-shifting humanoids. Once again, there are penalties for breaking certain rules. Men seduced by fox spirits often waste away, lose vitality, or become delusional. Travelers who disrespect mountain spirits disappear forever, explaining many national missing hiker cases, much like missing 411 in America and abroad. Those who fail to show proper bowing etiquette risk possession. Bow first, ask questions later. Apologize for trespassing. Salt purification is a good idea when leaving forests or coastlines. Never follow a child or a woman into the woods at night. In Africa, they talk of the tokoloshe. In southern African cultures, the tokoloshe is a malicious, shape-shifting, dwarf-like entity invoked through magic. A goblin! Consequences of taboo breakage with the tokoloshe include physical attacks, poltergeist activity, sleep paralysis, sexual assault. Note of clarification, I only said it that way because I'm hinting towards the future topic we'll be discussing on the show, not as like ooh la la kind of way. So, yeah. Listening to it again, I thought I should clarify. Death from fright or sudden illness. And many homes are built with beds raised high on bricks to prevent tokoloshe access. Monsters under the bed. Ash and salt around doorways provide a defense, as well as protective charms, or consulting a sangoma or traditional healer. And as mentioned previously, in North America, we have the missing 411 connection. Indigenous tribes describe races of quote-unquote little people, or mountain spirits, whose territories must not be violated. In modern times, many missing 411 cases occur in exactly these zones. There are common patterns of sudden disappearances with no struggle, search dogs refusing to follow tracks, victims later found barefoot with clothing removed or as far from the initial site of where they disappeared as possible. There's periods of missing time or amnesia. And folklorists note that these are identical to European fairy abduction motifs. Of course, you have the classic tales of the changelings, with many broken rules and stolen children guidelines to be followed. Changelings appear in every culture. Ireland, Wales, Scandinavia, Greece, Germany, the Cherokee Little People. When parents broke fairy customs, especially during childbirth, the unseen race punished them by stealing the infant and leaving a double, or a fetch, in its place. A sickly, uncanny, ill-tempered, often intelligent, but physically frail imposter of a child. Signs included sudden wasting, strange appetites, overdeveloped speech, a fear of iron, and laughing at nothing. Changelings are often one of the darkest intersections of folklore and human tragedy, a reminder that the unseen race can be merciless when offended. Of all the modern stories illustrating fairy vengeance, none is as internationally famous as the controversy surrounding the lone hawthorn tree on the future site of John DeLorean's car plant in Dunmurry. Local workers warned DeLorean that the tree was a fairy thorn, sacred marker of the Ao-Shi. Remove it, they said, and expect ruin in return. DeLorean scoffed at first, but when excavators repeatedly malfunctioned, workers refused to continue, and several local advisors insisted the factory would be cursed. It was only then that he finally relented. The construction was redesigned so that the tree remained standing, and yet, whether coincidental or karmic, or perhaps because of a ever-worsening cocaine habit, the DeLorean Motor Company collapsed spectacularly only a few years later, embroiled in scandal, bankruptcy, and a federal sting operation. To this day, the locals say he didn't cut the fairy tree, but he came too close. There's the aforementioned Huldafolk and modern bulldozers incident. When a highway crew attempted to remove an infamous boulder home to the Huldafolk, strange problems followed. Bulldozers refused to start. Workers developed migraines, nausea, and vertigo. May cause supernatural diarrhea. Tires blew out inexplicably. Tools vanished. Radios malfunctioned. A freak wave destroyed an equipment delivery that was coming by barge. After 2 months of delays, a psychic mediator was brought in to ask permission, and only after a ritual apology did the construction successfully resume, after relocating the boulder rather than destroying it. The aforementioned Tokoloshe in South Africa, one of the most disturbing rule-breaking accounts, comes from Joburg in the 1960s. When a man publicly mocked a local witch doctor, his home became the center of Tokoloshe phenomena. His wife was attacked nightly by an unseen presence. His livestock died without cause. Objects were thrown across rooms without human contact. He developed a wasting illness that doctors couldn't diagnose. Only after seeking the same healer he insulted did the phenomena stop. His apology was accepted, but his health never fully returned. Across all these incidents, the message is universal. Mockery is a dangerous mode of trespass. In Denmark and Sweden, countless stories warn of men who accepted a dance from an elven girl. Beautiful, seductive, graceful, and lethal. Oh, yeah. The consequences include aging overnight, being drained of vitality, becoming mute or paralyzed, disappearing without a trace, returning with memories distorted or erased. One Danish folktale describes a bridegroom who heard music in the forest and joined the dance. He returned the next morning, gaunt, gray-haired, and raving incoherently. He died within hours. His last words were, "They wouldn't let me go." Whoa. Then there's the Siberian Leshy. The Leshy are guardian spirits of the Russian wilderness. It's not outright hostile unless the forest is disrespected. The breaking of rules triggers disorientation, lost time, hallucinations, temporary madness, or being led deeper into the woods until overcome by death via exposure. One modern account from 1981 tells of lumbermen who ignored a village elder's warnings. They mocked the Leshy and boasted loudly. Later, 3 of them vanished for 48 hours and were found miles away, naked, exhausted, and unable to explain what had happened. They remembered only a tall man with bark for skin. And then there's changelings, the ultimate consequence. Changelings are perhaps the darkest expression of rule-breaking retaliation. Every European tradition warns that childbirth, infancy, and postpartum periods create a temporary vulnerability. Breaking of protective customs could result in a child being swapped, a family being tormented nightly, severe illness, cattle dying, a parent going mad. A Welsh account tells of a woman who failed to cover her newborn with iron scissors before sleeping. She woke to find a child who looked identical but cried nonstop. refused to feed, and laughed with a shockingly adult voice. Goo gaga, I'm a baby over here. Gee. She sought a cunning man who confirmed her suspicion. The true child had been taken. This theme recurs across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Modern parallels include children in missing 401 cases returning with uncanny knowledge, sudden personality shifts, lost time, post-traumatic mutism. Even psychologists admit that changeling lore expresses a persistent cross-cultural fear that something non-human wants human children for unknown reasons. Before we continue, it's worth giving Missing 411 a full subsection. The patterns include disappearances near berry patches, a major fairy taboo, sudden storms immediately after vanishing, victims found on mountaintops or areas previously searched, clothing mysteriously removed, lack of footprints, dogs refusing to track, survivors reporting bright lights or strangers in the woods, children speaking of being carried by someone who looked like a person but wasn't quite right. Many Native American tribes openly attribute these disappearances to the other people, term strikingly close to Kirk's co-walkers. These are not mere coincidences, they are folkloric continuities. Modern culture has committed a major trespass against fairies. It sanitized the Fae. Disney turned them into whimsical, sparkly winged helpers. Toy aisles turned them into fashion dolls with glitter wands. Social media turned them into aesthetic vibes, man. In doing so, we lost something important. Not just the darkness, but the complexity. In older traditions, fairies would steal livestock, seduce married men and ruin their families, kidnap children, cause madness, destroy crops, curse bloodlines for entire generations, demand offerings and respect, and retaliate when offended. They would abduct men and women for breeding. They would leave people wandering, naked, confused, and frostbitten in the wilderness. They'd even kill. The original Fae were not benign. They were neighbors, sometimes courteous, sometimes dangerous, always unpredictable. The best analogy is wildlife. Most animals won't attack you unless you provoke them, disrespect their territory, or ignore the rules they expect you to know instinctively. The old world did not think of fairies as fictional. They were a parallel species with their own laws, their own morality, and absolutely no reason to tolerate human arrogance. Robert Kirk understood this. Jacques Vallée understood this. Many indigenous cultures still understand this. The message, stripped of sentimentality, is simple. Fairies are not cute. They are not cuddly. They are a people, and people can be dangerous. Where Robert Kirk meets Jacques Vallée is right in the middle of a crop circle. You can only spend so long immersed in Robert Kirk before you start noticing a pattern. One that begins in the 17th century but stretches almost into the modern UFO era. It's the pattern that Jacques Vallée famously wrote about. The phenomenon evolves, but it never fully changes. The masks shift, from fae to angels to spirits to spacemen. But the underlying behaviors, interactions, and symbols remain stubbornly consistent. This is not a myth transforming into folklore and then sci-fi. This is one phenomena reinventing its public relations strategy. And if you chart the continuity over the centuries, the curve runs straight through. The Secret Commonwealth, the Mowing Devil, fairy rings, changeling lore, mystical nights on Glastonbury tour, and now, modern UFO contact, orbs, abductions, and crop circles. Let's start with the single most tantalizing bridge between the Fae lore and modern ufology, the Mowing Devil, aka the first crop circle, quite possibly, at least on record. In 1678, a woodcut pamphlet circulated across Hertfordshire, titled The Mowing Devil, or Strange News Out of Hertfordshire. describes a farmer unwilling to pay a laborer's asking wage. In anger, he exclaimed he'd rather have the devil himself mow the field. That night, witnesses saw the field glowing, a strange bright light hovering above the wheat. By morning, the entire field was cut in a perfect pattern, quote, as if the devil himself had done it with a machine, unquote. It is, in every aspect, a circular design created overnight by a luminous aerial presence, leaving behind a precisely patterned, unexplained alteration of crops, attributed to a non-human intelligence who takes offense at human disrespect. Sound familiar? The Mowing Devil is essentially a 17th century crop circle report, driven not by beings from Zeta Reticuli, but by something the farmer would have understood. Fairies or demons, the other order of beings. This is exactly what Vallée meant when he says, quote, the phenomenon is real, but it speaks the language of the witness, unquote. Fairy rings appear when a circular formation emerges overnight. The plants behave strangely. The soil shows anomalous properties. Humans stepping into the center report dizziness, lost time, or disorientation. And folklore attributes the phenomenon to the dancing of the good folk. The difference is not data. The difference is a cultural vocabulary. Modern belief attributes this phenomena to extraterrestrials. Fae abductions and alien abductions follow the same blueprint. Let's lay the two side by side. Fae abductions, Robert Kirk's area, occur at night. Victims freeze or go still, aka being paralyzed. They report time distortion, missing memories, transported to a bright otherworldly realm, often floated or whisked away, unbidden medical examinations, sexual or reproductive implications, return in a confused or altered state, sometimes never at all. Alien abductions post-1960s occur at night. Victims experience paralysis, time distortion, missing time, bright light and levitation, medical examinations, genetic manipulation, and they return disoriented or traumatized, if they return at all. It's the same phenomena rendered in different technological metaphors. In Kirk's day, visitors ride quote-unquote airy bodies, luminous forms or horses of light. In ours, they arrive in metallic discs, but the structure of the contact is identical. Then you have doppelgangers and the men in black. What Kirk described as quote-unquote double men, beings who imitate human appearance but act oddly. They appear in dozens of 17th century Scottish reports. Their traits include strange, stilted speech, mismatched emotional responses, excessive politeness or stiffness, an uncanny wrongness humans can sense instantly, sudden inexplicable vanishings. Now compare these to Men in Black reports of monotone or robotic speech. Monotone or robotic speech. Yes, please and thank you. Awkward attempts at acting human, an inability to understand common objects, inappropriate smiling, vanishing abruptly. Some experiencers say that the MIB seem like they're trying to pass as humans using only an approximate script, like something studying us from the outside in. Again, different era, same encounter profile. Then you have the Fae food rules and alien implantation. Fairies have rules about food, such as if you eat their food, you belong to them.
Oh, you're my wife now.
If you taste their fruit, you can no longer return to normal reality. If you ingest anything from their realm, your body changes. Modern abductees report forbidden foods, pills or fluids forced upon them, implants or biological materials inserted into their bodies, warnings not to eat or drink during encounters, physical changes afterwards. In both traditions, ingestion equals transformation or ownership. This is a persistent mythic mechanism. Then there are the strange lights in the sky, which are shared across cultures and centuries. Kirk described co-walkers who traveled in radiant vehicles made of quote-unquote condensed air or subtle bodies. Witnesses saw lights that hovered, split into multiple lights, dove into hills, circled lakes, entered the earth. If you remove the word Fae and insert UFO, nothing really changes. Even their apparent ability to descend into hills or rise from mounds matches modern reports of UFOs dematerializing or quote-unquote slipping into the earth.
Oh, yeah.
The boundary isn't physical, it's dimensional, just as modern physicists say. Then there's the fairy market versus alien hybrid programs. Here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. Fairy lore includes forced unions, taking human men or women for breeding, changeling infants, half-human offspring, subtle exchange of genetic essence, interest in human bloodlines, recurring family visitations across generations. Modern UFO abduction literature includes forced unions, hybrid children, sperm or egg extraction, genetic sampling, lineage-based repeat contact, intergenerational patterns, and so forth. This isn't coincidence, it's continuity. The phenomenon has always been obsessed with us biologically, which raises a troubling but intriguing question. If interbreeding is possible, what does this imply about our genetic origins? Either these beings share ancestry with us, they engineered us, or they are us, future, past, parallel, or displaced. Kirk described the Fae as neither angels nor humans, but an intermediate race capable of intermingling with us. Modern science suggests we carry Neanderthal DNA, Denisovan DNA, ghost hominin DNA from an unknown ancient species, unexplained mutation clusters, sudden leaps in cognitive development, an entire population, Rh-negative blood, with no clear evolutionary origin story. Whatever the Fae were, they fit suspiciously well into the gaps that we can't explain. Valais, Keel, and the ultra-terrestrial superspectrum, upon which Valais famously said, "The UFO phenomena act like a control system." John Keel insisted, "Contact comes in the language of the witness." British writers Anthony Roberts and Jeff Gilbertson argued, "The dark gods shift their mask to match the age." And Robert Kirk wrote, "They live in a commonwealth with ourselves." For centuries, one hypothesis: we are sharing this world with another intelligence. It has always been here. It adapts its presentation to our expectations, and it interacts with us, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, according to rules we almost understand. Everything else is a costume. So what are we really dealing with? A few possibilities that keep rising to the surface are a parallel civilization, dimensional, not spatial, living beside us but phase shifted, what Kirk called cohabitants. B, a pre-human terrestrial species, the original owners of this planet, displaced underground or into some other medium. C, a psychic, energetic intelligence, neither physical nor imaginary, but emergent, like Valais' information patterns. D, our own subconscious projected outward, some Jungian archetypal force wearing narrative skins. E, a technologically advanced species using symbolic interfaces, communicating in mythic metaphors as a form of cognitive camouflage. Or F, something fundamentally other. Aliens, ultra-terrestrials, demons, fae. Pick your particular poison. All the above, G. Whatever the truth, all traditions agree, they are not us, they are not gods, they're not imaginary, and they are not harmless. Now, while investigating into Robert Kirk, I also stumbled across something that could be considered a bit of a historical precursor to the X-Files. Samuel Pepys, Peeps, early psychical sleuths, and the strange prehistory of official paranormal investigation, all encapsulated in this particular bit of research. Also, going forward, it's worth noting that much of this was investigated specifically with military applications in mind. So, something to think about. Before we return to Robert Kirk's disappearance and the darker implications of fairy contact, we need to take a short detour. A surprising one. Because while digging through this material, something odd kept surfacing. A subplot, a side road, a thread running parallel to Kirk's story, but not quite intersecting with it. A kind of proto-X-Files. A small, eccentric fraternity of early modern investigators, bureaucrats, scholars, clergymen, and even naval administrators, who, centuries before Mulder and Scully, quietly documented and debated the supernatural with the seriousness of statecraft. These weren't just superstitious peasants or pamphleteers. These were high-ranking officials, some with direct influence on policy and governance. One of them was Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, naval administrator, and one of the great bureaucratic minds of the 17th century. Yes, Pepys, the same man who helped rebuild the Royal Navy, who chronicled the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London, and who also found himself dabbling in what we would today call psychical research. The result is a strange, early modern paper trail that feels uncannily like an early season of X-Files, only with powdered wigs, quill pens, and ministers who investigate apparitions before committee meetings.
Yes!
Pepys is remembered as a practical man, but his diary contains more than naval accounts and political gossip. He records ghost investigations, seances, spectral sightings in London, witchcraft trials, conversations with cunning men or sorcerers, dreams interpreted as omens, and reports of the fae or spirit-haunted places across the countryside. At one point, he attends a demonstration where a supposed mystic claims he can, quote, see spirits in crystals, unquote. Pepys does not scoff. He takes notes. He observes. He evaluates the claims with the skepticism of a bureaucrat, but the curiosity of a proto-anthropologist. Pepys also documents consultations with clergy about supernatural disturbances, including a poltergeist case, a corpse said to bleed in the presence of its murderer, prophetic dreams reported by naval officers, and stories from Scotland about the second sight, the same phenomena Robert Kirk would later treat as reality. Pepys, without intending to, creates a government-adjacent paranormal file. If Fox Mulder had powdered cuffs and a fondness for roast eel, he'd essentially be Pepys. Peeps.
Yes!
Meanwhile, over at the new-founded Royal Society, several members like Robert Boyle, Edmund Halley, and John Aubrey took a surprising interest in apparitions, spectral lights, oracular dreams, folk healers, prophecy, divination, fairy encounters, and alleged miracles or quote-unquote preternatural events. They filed them in what was called Things Undeservedly Forgotten, a proto-anomalous database. Boyle, the father of modern chemistry, compiled accounts of poltergeist outbreaks, second sight, psychic premonitions, haunted houses, and even early reports of luminous airships. John Aubrey wrote natural histories filled with fairy beliefs, witch lore, and sightings of, quote, tall men in shining garments. Well, technically it's tall men in shining garments.
You mean shining?
Shh! You wanna get sued?
Who also vanished suddenly. Descriptions that could today sit comfortably in a UFO encounter catalog. Edmund Halley, the man with the comet, speculated about hollow earth civilizations. All of this was done under the banner of early empiricism. They weren't writing fiction, they were writing case notes. These men were not cranks. Well, not entirely. They were the most educated scholars in England at the time, and they behaved like the world's first scientific paranormal investigators. Then there's Joseph Glanville, a clergyman slash philosopher whose work reads like the pilot episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker. In his book, Sadducismus Triumphatus, he argues that spirits are real, apparitions have a law-like behavior, witches exist but are barely, if at all, understood, the invisible world interacts with this visible one, and denying these reports is a dangerous form of intellectual blindness. He collected eyewitness testimonies from across Britain investigating levitations, teleportations, spectral attacks, strange lights, and airy world encounters. Glanville corresponded directly with Robert Boyle and other Royal Society figures, effectively forming a small but unofficial paranormal task force. Robert Kirk would later cite Glanville's work approvingly. In today's terms, Glanville was the analyst, Pepys was the field bureaucrat recording sightings, Boyle was the scientific advisor, Aubrey the folklorist, and Kirk was the spiritual ethnographer. It's essentially an X-Files division only 300 years early. And perhaps most tellingly, all of these men shared a similar interest in this as to how it could be applied militarily for the good of the British Empire.
Yes!
Here's where things sink unexpectedly. Scotland, in Pepys' time, was already considered a hotbed of fairy encounters, second sight, ghostly portents, and strange disappearances. Pepys received reports from military men stationed near the Highlands describing soldiers who saw lights move against the wind, men who collapsed after claiming they'd encountered the fair folk, warnings about taboo hills, and the dangers of sleeping on certain mounds. These are the same kinds of accounts Robert Kirk would later organize into the Secret Commonwealth. Pepys and his colleagues created the early bureaucratic trail. Kirk becomes the ethnographer, Vallée becomes the modern theorist, and you, right now, are inheriting this centuries-long chain of curiosity.
Do tell.
One of the unspoken truths of this entire period is that British intelligentsia didn't reject the supernatural. They documented it. Quietly, privately, but systematically. They believed that the world was stranger than it appeared. The airy commonwealth was real. There were rules governing unseen beings, and humans could interact with them either accidentally or deliberately. This creates a secret lineage of sorts leading all the way to modern experiencers and MUFON reports, the digital era of the Secret Commonwealth. The pattern is unbroken. Britain has been semi-officially studying the paranormal for close to 400 years. When Robert Kirk began documenting fairy encounters, he does it with the precision of Pepys, the curiosity of Glanville, and the systematic, almost scientific instinct of the early Royal Society. He wasn't writing fantasy, he wasn't preserving superstition, he was contributing to a grand, quiet project already underway, cataloging the non-human intelligences that share our world. Kirk may have gone further than any of them, much further. Far enough that the beings he described, if the legends hold true, took notice of him. When we talk about Robert Kirk, it's easy, almost too easy, to imagine him as a folkloric figure himself, a misty character on a Scottish hillside who may or may not have existed.
What's haggis?
A name on a plaque, a ghost story recited for tourists. But Kirk was real, flesh and blood real, paperwork and baptisms real. He was a minister of the Church of Scotland, educated, respected, multilingual, a translator of the Psalms, and part of a family deeply embedded in the religious and political life of the Highlands. And on May 14th, 1692, this respected minister walked up the slopes of Doon Hill near Aberfoyle and never returned. The official cause was a sudden collapse, death by natural causes. The unofficial cause was whatever else lived inside that hill. The closer we examine the disappearance, the more the official version starts to feel like the superficial readings of a much stranger text. Kirk had just completed a manuscript of the Secret Commonwealth, the first systematic first-hand ethnography of the fairy world, a document that treated the fae beings not as superstitions but as a parallel race of subtle-bodied intelligences, and he didn't just compile these accounts, he collected them with urgency. Witnesses noted he seemed increasingly preoccupied, sleeping little, walking the hills at odd hours, muttering about an oath of silence he believed he was breaking by writing the book. A local shepherd later claimed Kirk had told him, quote, "They are displeased," unquote. A line that reads like a campfire tale until you remember this was a minister, not a poet, saying it. Dune Hill is not subtle. It rises from the landscape like a dropped bead of molten glass, smooth, round, crowned with ancient trees, a classic fairy knoll in Celtic tradition, the place where the boundary thins, the air warps, and the old laws apply. That's a thin place, now. Kirk took his evening walks there daily. He believed the hill was a gateway, a literal door to the Commonwealth, he described. In his manuscript, he writes, quote, "These subterraneans live underground, in caves, where they shift as we do above," unquote. He treated them not as ethereal metaphors, but as neighbors, and neighbors that could be easily offended. So it was on that night of May 14th that Kirk left his house after dinner. He often walked barefoot, a detail witnesses noted with discomfort. Some said he believed the Fae could not touch you if you stayed unshod upon their ground. Others said he believed the opposite. Kirk reached the top of Dune Hill. At some point he collapsed, at least according to the official version. His body was found on the slope, but here the narrative forks, cleanly and sharply, into two incompatible paths. Path 1, the official story, is efficient. Kirk walked up the hill, suffered a sudden heart attack, collapsed, and died. His parish erected a headstone. His manuscript remained unpublished for over a century, and the case was closed. But the locals never accepted this version. Not then, and not now. Because everyone in Aberfoyle knew that Dune Hill had rules. And the worst rule of all was simple. Do not reveal their secrets. And Kirk had just written an entire book doing precisely that. Path 2 is the traditional account, which has persisted for more than 300 years, and states Kirk never died, he was taken. His body on the hillside was an apparition, a glamour, a Fae-generated decoy. They spirited him away in retaliation for exposing their world. According to the legend, Kirk later appeared, not to everyone, but to his cousin, Graham of Dutray. Dutray? I'm not going to... It's Dutray. Trust yourself, Mike. You got this. D-U-C-H-R-A-Y. I'm just going to say Graham. We'll go with Graham. His cousin, Graham. He materialized at the foot of Graham's bed and delivered a message that could have been pulled straight from a Gothic morality play. He said, "I am not dead. I dwell in the fairy realm. When next you gather for the baptism of my son, cast a knife over my apparition and I shall be freed." A single ritual action, a sympathetic spell, and a rescue mission, all in one. Graham agreed. On the day of the baptism, as the story goes, Kirk appeared as a hazy, shimmering, spectral figure, glimpsed as if underwater. Graham froze. The knife was never thrown. The apparition dissolved and Kirk was lost forever. A folkloric tale, certainly, but not one that behaves like ordinary folklore for one particular reason. It refuses to die. People still tie cloth ribbons or clooties to the trees of Dune Hill, pleading for Kirk's release or asking protection from the good people that he described. His disappearance remains an open cultural file, a cold case with no statute of limitations. Kirk's story isn't unique. It sits inside a global pattern. People being taken by fairies, jinn, sky beings, luminous figures, shadowy humanoids, the Shining Ones, or the Tall Men of Celtic and Nordic lore, where the body is never found, or, if found, found altered, or dead under impossible conditions. Sometimes found intact, but wrong somehow. Kirk is an early modern example of what missing persons researchers particularly those studying the missing 411 phenomena, would consider a cluster category case. Disappears near water, near boulders or granite, near a high place, near a boundary line, with sudden weather shifts, and contradictory witness accounts. Dune Hill checks every one of these boxes. The folkloric reading is that Kirk was taken for violating a pact. The modern anomalist reading is that the phenomena acted to protect itself. 2 centuries before anyone used the phrase ultra-terrestrial, Kirk walked into a pattern so old it predates written myth. What makes Kirk's case distinct is not the disappearance, but the context. Kirk wasn't a wanderer or a drunk or a shepherd. He wasn't dabbling or calling up spirits for entertainment. He was a minister, a scholar, a systematic recorder, a bilingual intermediary between oral traditions and written culture, and one of the first people to treat fairies as a non-human civilization rather than a superstition. He approached them like a journalist, an ethnographer, an anthropologist, like an early psychical researcher. And that may have been the problem, because in many global traditions, contact with the unseen is allowed so long as you don't put it in writing. Knowledge shared orally is alive, flexible, and unbinding. Knowledge written down becomes fixed and therefore dangerous. Kirk took to a living, dynamic, ephemeral phenomenon and pinned it to the page. If the Fae of Dune Hill exist even metaphorically, he committed an act of exposure, and according to the legend, he paid for it. So what happened on that hillside? Well, there's 3 choices. The official version, a minister, fatigued and overworked, simply collapsed and died. The folklore version, Kirk broke an ancient taboo and was taken, his death an illusion, or the hybrid theory. He suffered a real physical event, but in the exact symbolic location and the exact mythic pattern that folklore has long associated with supernatural retribution. He suffered a real physical event, but in the exact symbolic location and the exact mythic pattern that folklore has long associated with supernatural retribution. Even Valet would say, when folklore and physical events overlap, pay attention. Kirk's grassy mound remains a pilgrimage site, where visitors still report lights, sensations of being watched, disorientation, time loss, sudden emotional shifts, anomalous temperature drops, and apparitions seen out of the corner of the eye. If nothing else, the hill behaves like a place with a story to maintain, and it has maintained it for more than 3 centuries. So, closing out, I mentioned earlier in the episode that I stumbled across another researcher whose end, we'll say, very eerily parallels that of Reverend Robert Kirk. Now, this man was a researcher by the name of Anthony Roberts. He's one of the co-authors, along with, I believe it's Jeff Gilbertson. Yes, Jeff Gilbertson, who wrote a book called The Dark Gods, which basically takes the underlying premise of ultra-terrestrials and builds a terrifying thesis that these beings have been controlling us or manipulating us throughout history to this very day. On a mist-shrouded night, in the Somerset Hills, atop the wind-whipped slope of Glastonbury Tor, a man pauses beneath the silver glare of the moon. He's there for a lunar eclipse, a ritual, perhaps, summoning not merely the shape of the moon, but the very spirit of the ancient lore that dwells in those hills. He's Anthony Roberts, co-author of The Dark Gods, an esoteric treatise that argued humanity has long been besieged by unseen, sinister forces, by entities that masquerade as UFOs, fairies, men in black, and long-forgotten unnamed gods. Roberts, along with co-author Jeff Gilbertson, published The Dark Gods in 1980 under the foreword of paranormal researcher Colin Wilson. If you're unfamiliar with Colin Wilson, I highly recommend reading some of his books. The Occult by Colin Wilson is a good place to start. Chock full of mind-bending morsels. Anywho, the work is part occult study, part conspiracy mythology, part cosmic horror. The suggestion that our world has always been subjected to quote-unquote dark gods, using advanced interdimensional stratagems disguised as UFOs, fairies, or even secret elites, Illuminati. According to observers, something changed in Roberts in the years after the book. His tone grew more urgent, his projects more isolated. Some say he began focusing intensely on the landscape metaphysics of Glastonbury. Ley lines, fairy hills, hidden portals, and the like. One specialist recalls that Roberts ran a small publishing outfit called Zodiac House from the Glastonbury region and became increasingly obsessive about geomythology and spirit contact. For centuries, Glastonbury Tor has been regarded as one of Britain's most numinous landscapes, a place where myth bleeds into the topography.
Broken down, boy, in its purest form.
Rising abruptly from the Somerset levels like an island adrift in the mist. The Tor has carried dozens of overlapping identities. Avalon, if you will. The Isle of Glass, the spiral hill of Gwyn ap Nudd, the Fairy King and Lord of the Dead. Beneath its conical rise, legend says, like caverns opening up into the other world, entrances to Anwen, perhaps the hollow earth kingdom of the Fae. Medieval monks at nearby Glastonbury Abbey wove their own sacred genealogy around it, claiming that Joseph of Arimathea...
Wow! Joseph of Arimathea! 26 conversions in AD 46!
...had arrived here after the crucifixion, planting its staff in the earth to sprout the holy thorn tree that blooms each Christmas. By the late 19th century, occult revivalists reimagined the Tor as a terrestrial chakra, the heart center in a mystical map of the world's energy systems. Dowsers traced invisible currents along the ley lines, radiating from its summit, while visionaries and mystics alike, such as Dion Fortune or Wellesley Tudor Pole, declared it as a spiritual battery, linking Avalon to Atlantis, to Jerusalem, and so forth. To them, Glastonbury was not merely sacred, but alive, a sentient node or nexus in the planetary network, where ancient pagan forces and Christian mysteries intertwined. Folklorists, meanwhile, never forgot its darker tenets. Local tales spoke of the fairy hosts seen circling the Tor under the moonlight, of phantom processions, lights in the hill, and sudden disappearances. The folklorist Robert Kirk, topic of this episode, whose writings Anthony Roberts revered, was said to have vanished into such a world. Some whisper that on nights when the moon is high, the door to Kirk's Secret Commonwealth opens once more on the slopes of the Tor. That rhymed. By Robert's time, Glastonbury had become a magnet for seekers, mystics, and occult pilgrims, a British Sedona, steeped in mythic voltage. For a man already exploring the idea that alien and fairy contact were one and the same, it was the perfect laboratory, a thin place where the veil between worlds might actually be torn. It was on this charged landscape that Anthony Roberts met his end. On a cold night in 1990, during a lunar eclipse, he began climbing the Tor. Some say to witness the celestial alignment, others to perform a solitary ritual of invocation. The invocation of Reverend Robert Kirk. Accounts differ, but all agree he never made it back down alive. The official cause was a sudden heart attack. The unofficial story is much darker. Locals whispered that Roberts had been attempting to summon the spirit of Robert Kirk, and that the fairy host, guardians of the hill's invisible kingdom, had claimed him in retribution. In the retellings that followed, fact and legend fused seamlessly. A man obsessed with mythic landscapes ultimately absorbed into one. Whether coincidence, symbol, or something stranger, his death seemed to complete the very pattern he'd been tracing. The fatal geometry of belief, where those who stare too long into the fractal designs of the hidden world are sometimes pulled across its threshold. In the end, Anthony Roberts became part of the mythology he spent his life decoding. Like Robert Kirk before him, he crossed from chronicler to participant, from theorist to spirit. The dark gods had proposed that belief itself could open doors, that consciousness, ritual, and place might conspire to manifest the archetypes they invoke. If that were true, then Glastonbury Tor was the perfect ritual altar, a landscape steeped in centuries of invocation, charged with the psychic residue of pilgrims, poets, and seekers. Robert's death, mundane or mystical, seemed to seal the mythos in a final act of sympathetic magic, the author consumed by his own subject. Yet perhaps that is how such stories survive. Each generation finds its new messenger, or its next sacrifice, to carry the old current forward. From Kirk's Secret Commonwealth to Robert's Dark Gods, the idea endures that we are never alone in our own world, that unseen intelligences still shadow the human dream. Whether we call them fairies, archetypes, or ultra-terrestrials, they remain what the Tor itself has always been, a mirror. What we find there depends on what we dare to summon. You get out what you put in. On the fateful night in 1990, Roberts ascended Glastonbury Tor. Some sources say the date was the 9th of February, tied to a lunar eclipse. He purportedly suffered a heart attack and died on the slope, aged only 49 or 50, depending on the source. The accounts say that he was descending or returning from the top of the Tor when his heart attack struck. His son apparently witnessed the event, though the surviving records and blog accounts don't provide detailed commentary beyond that. It's mostly mentioned to reinforce the story that the death was sudden and unexpected, and to frame the folklore element, i.e. fairies claimed him, as posthumous mythologizing, rather than eyewitness claim. But immediately after his death, the lore diverged. Among the more mystical circles, Roberts did not simply collapse. He was spirited away. Some claim he'd been killed or carried off by the fairies of the Tor while attempting to summon the spirit of Robert Kirk. Legend has it, much the same as Robert Kirk. According to one version, quote, afterward a mythology developed. Certain ignorant folk would say that he'd died on the Tor. Those of us who love Tony know better, unquote. Whether myth or fact, the story fits the themes of the dark gods. Interdimensional beings, hidden doorways in the landscape, the thin line between human and otherworldly presence. Robert's death becomes part of the book's narrative, the author glimpsing something too profound or too dark and then vanishing at the threshold. While a large number of the sources which detail the strange passing of Anthony Roberts attribute his cause of death to an entirely unexpected heart attack, taking the life of a relatively young, by all accounts perfectly healthy man. However, it's this particular cause of death that demands we take yet another look into some of the long-standing, well-established folklore surrounding the mysterious beings that we, throughout the ages, have often referred to as fairies, elves, the fae, or more often than not, the good and kindly folk, out of fear of potentially falling under their negative attention, or worse, their otherworldly ire and wrath. In British, and particularly Scottish and Irish folklore, quote-unquote elf shot refers to a sudden, sharp pain or injury believed to be inflicted by invisible fairies or elves. The term appears in texts as early as the Middle Ages and persisted into the 18th century, especially in rural communities with strong traditions of the good people. Typically, the afflicted would experience sudden stinging or shooting pains in the body, in muscles, joints, or the chest, often described as if tiny arrows had pierced the flesh. These injuries were sometimes attributed to fairy bows or enchanted darts fired by mischievous or vengeful spirits, a supernatural explanation for ailments and misfortunes that lacked obvious natural causes. Historical remedies for elf shot ranged from ritual charms to herbal remedies. Clerics and cunning folk might prescribe a pin or iron object to ward off the darts, quote unquote, or recite prayers to counteract their effects. Sometimes the phenomena was interpreted more broadly. Sudden illness, inexplicable fatigue, or even fainting could be considered elf-shot, particularly in sensitive individuals or those known to have offended the Fae through disrespect or intrusion into sacred spaces. The concept also appears in bardic poetry, magical charms, parish records, and the like, suggesting that communities treated such events with both fear and ritual attention. Some folklorists and modern occult interpreters have speculated that a severe elf shot to the chest could correspond to physiological phenomena such as arrhythmia, myocardial infarction, or even a sudden heart attack. The suddenness of elf shot, an intense, piercing, and inexplicable pain, parallels many accounts of cardiac events that strike without warning. In a cultural context, especially in isolated or mystical landscapes like Glastonbury Tor, a person steeped in belief in fairies or other liminal forces might experience the onset of a cardiac event as fairy interference. This intersection of folklore and physiology adds a haunting layer to legends like that surrounding Anthony Roberts. A sudden cardiac episode on a sacred hill, witnessed by a family member, could easily become mythologized as a direct act of the fairy host, particularly if the individual was already engaged in ritualistic ley line study or attempts to contact unseen intelligences. In such cases, the folklore of elf-shot provides both a cultural vocabulary for sudden mysterious death and a symbolic framework that transforms ordinary pathology into a narrative of supernatural intervention. In the winds that swirl around Glastonbury Tor, one might ask, did the dark gods come to collect their author? Did the hill itself swallow him? Or did he truly die of a mundane cause? The truth may lie somewhere in between. The Dark Gods is one of those strange genre-bending books from the late 1970s, early 80s British Earth Mysteries milieu, a hybrid of ufology, mythography, and occult cosmology. And quick side note, I would never have found out about this eerie parallel if it weren't for a particularly awesome website called Nocturnal Revelries. Nocturnal Revelries is a website created and maintained by I believe he's a literature professor, an Irish fella. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. Please forgive me. But if you haven't seen or checked out this site, spank yourself and then go check it out because it is both awesome and hilarious. Anyway, moving on. So the Earth Mysteries milieu is a hybrid of ufology, mythography, and occult cosmology. Roberts and Gilbertson proposed that the great cycles of myth, religion, and even modern UFO encounters are not random cultural products, but manifestations of a single recurring intrusion of ultra-terrestrial intelligences. Drawing from Jung, Charles Fort, and John Keel's Operation Trojan Horse, they argue that these intelligences operate through symbolic masks suited to each age. Gods, fairies, angels, devils, spacemen. Humanity, in their view, is caught in a perennial feedback loop with the unseen, producing both mystical revelation and mass delusion. The quote-unquote dark gods are not strictly evil, rather they are a predatory archetype, feeding on human emotion and belief, shaping history through possession, cults, and the manipulation of consciousness. Various hierophanies. Fannies. Through the ages. The authors weave together a dizzying lattice of examples. Celtic fairy lore, the Shaver mysteries, Richard Shaver, the Darrows, etc., Atlantis, demonic apparitions, ley line theory, and Cold War UFO contactees, to argue that the planet itself may function as a psychic circuit or sentient entity. One take. They reinterpret holy sites and megalithic structures as nodes in the planetary intelligence, suggesting that ritual, architecture, and technology all form conduits through which these forces interact with us. Where earlier occultists spoke of angels or elementals, Roberts and Gilbertson see parasitic cosmic systems that exploit mankind's mythic imagination. The book's tone is semi-apocalyptic, yet visionary. It warns that modern technology, mass media, and scientific arrogance have made us the ideal hosts for the Dark God's newest incarnation, one that manifests through UFO cults, alien abductions, and psychic warfare. Where the Dark Gods distinguishes itself from its American contemporaries is in its occult/psychological framing. Roberts and Gilbertson absorbed the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis first advanced by John Keel and later refined by Jacques Vallée, but they filter it through the esoteric landscape mysticism of Britain, sacred geometry, Arthurian and Grail mythos, and the numinous charge of ancient sites like Glastonbury Tor. Colin Wilson, who wrote the foreword, praised the authors for advancing what he saw as an evolutionary occultism. Yet the Dark Gods is far less optimistic than Wilson's existential humanism. Its vision of non-human intelligences is neither cosmic mentor nor abstract archetype, but a living psychic ecosystem that feeds upon belief itself. Entities that become real through our attention. Pay attention. Ritual and technological imagination. In this way, the book anticipates later thinkers who treat modern phenomena from mass media cults and UFO religions to machine consciousness and AI god forms as new masks of the same timeless presence. It closes not with revelation but with warning that every age invents its own dark gods, and that in the electronic century they are learning to speak through our circuits, whether they are literal circuits or possibly are neural circuits. The Secret Commonwealth, first written in 1691 but not published until 1815, is one of the earliest systematic attempts to catalog and theorize the fairy world as a parallel order of reality rather than mere superstition. Robert Kirk compiled accounts from Highlanders who claimed to see or traffic with the good people. His tone is that of an ethnographer theologian, fascinated but cautious. Kirk describes the fairies as an intermediate race between angels and men, peeps, subterraneans, quote-unquote, who live in a subtle, luminous body, feed on the essence of plants, and move through the air in a world parallel with ours. Peeps. He insists that the fairy commonwealth has its own laws, language, hierarchies, and moral code, and that certain seers, or men of second sight, can perceive them because of a rare alignment of spiritual and bodily faculties. More than a folkloric compendium, the Secret Commonwealth reads as a proto-psychological treatise on altered states and hidden dimensions. Kirk speculates that fairies might inhabit the same space as human dreams or visions, a realm of quote-unquote airy bodies, daimonic reality, where thought shapes form. He links fairy phenomena to astral projection, prophetic trance, and ghostly apparitions, anticipating later occult and parapsychological interpretations by centuries. Daimonic reality. Modern scholars view the text as a liminal artifact of the Scottish Enlightenment, poised between medieval demonology and modern psychical research. It attempts to reconcile Christian theology with the stubborn reality of folk experience, portraying the fairies not as evil spirits, but as a neighboring civilization glimpsed through a crack in perception. Daimonic reality. The legend of Robert Kirk is as enduring as his manuscript. According to local tradition in Aberfoyle, Kirk's deep interest in the fairy world drew the attention of the very beings he described. In 1692, he was said to have walked one evening up the slopes of Doon Hill, a green mound crowned by ancient trees, and collapsed suddenly dead, leaving his body in the grass. But villagers whispered that he had not died at all. The fairies had spirited him away in punishment for revealing their secrets. His coffin was buried in the kirkyard, yet, ironic, yes, yet stories circulated that his spirit appeared soon after to his cousin, urging him to rescue him from the fairy realm by throwing a dagger over his apparition at his child's baptism. The cousin faltered. The spell was not broken. Kirk was lost forever beneath the hill. Over the following centuries, Kirk's story fused with the landscape itself. Dune Hill became known as the Fairy Note, a pilgrimage spot where visitors still tie their cluties, aka ribbons and charms, through the trees in hopes of contact or protection. In the Victorian era, occultists like Andrew Lang and later W.I. Evans Wentz elevated Kirk to near saintly status, the minister who crossed the threshold and never returned. 20th century folklorists reframed him as a martyr of comparative religion, while modern neo-pagan and New Age circles treat him as a psychonaut before his time, a walker between worlds. The resonance with Anthony Roberts' death at Glastonbury Tor is striking. Both men sought communion with the unseen through a charged landscape. Both left behind texts that treat myth as metaphysics. And both, according to the lore, became part of the myth they studied. In Robert's case, the fairy world he wrote about in The Dark Gods seemed to reclaim him on a modern tour, just as it had claimed Kirk on a Scottish one 3 centuries earlier. The parallels provide a continuous thread in a long tradition of visionary researchers who crossed too close to the veil they investigated. Where Robert Kirk's Secret Commonwealth framed the fairy realm as an invisible civilization parallel with our own, Roberts and Gilbertson's Dark Gods reinterpreted the same liminal zone through the cosmology of the 20th century. In their view, Kirk's subterraneans had not vanished but changed costumes, reappearing as spacemen, men in black, psychic parasites, or the ultra-terrestrials glimpsed in modern UFO and occult phenomena. What Kirk called the aerial commonwealth became, in Robert's hands, an interdimensional ecology of unknown consciousness, still inhabiting sacred landscapes like Glastonbury Tor, feeding on attention, emotion, and belief. The two books, although separated by 3 centuries, describe the same haunting through different vocabularies. One clothed in Presbyterian theology, the other in Cold War-era metaphysics. Together they form a single mythical continuum, a secret commonwealth of the electronic age, where fairies ride flying discs and the dark gods speak through circuits instead of charms. And what are ley lines, if not globe-spanning circuits across the various vast ritual landscapes? What is consciousness, if not the relay of bioelectric energy across the pathways of neural circuits? As above, so below. Perhaps what the Dark Gods and its mythic predecessor, the Secret Commonwealth, were both reaching toward was not simply the existence of another world, but the possibility that the other world is a feedback loop, a mirror circuit that completes itself through us. Jacques Vallée suggested that high strangeness behaves like a control system, responding not to technology, but to belief, adapting its mask to match the circuitry of the human imagination. In this sense, the phenomena doesn't just haunt us, it uses us, syncing its signals to our nervous systems, embedding its mythic code in the brain's own electric architecture. Seen this way, Glastonbury's web of ley lines becomes the planetary analog of that same process, a landscape of luminous wiring where consciousness and geography intersect. The Tor's mythic voltage, the dart of elf shot, the pulse of the human heart, even the invisible currents running through earth and the ether, all belong to one vast, larger circuit, continuously closing and recharging itself. Robert's fatal climb, whether seen as tragedy or initiation, might be understood as the moment that circuit was completed. The man, the hill, and the myth joining in one flash of sympathetic magic resonance. In that instant, the dark gods did not need to appear. They had already been conjured into being by the circuitry of belief itself. And so it goes that to this very day, the Tor sits enigmatically silent, yet charged, a mysterious location where mind, myth, history, and ritual landscape intersect, and the dark god's eternal presence hums along quietly in sync with the invisible circuitry that we each unwittingly complete. Bing bong bang. I just found that Robert Kirk and Anthony Roberts, their stories parallel each other so weirdly. And once again, I want to give a shout out to the website Nocturnal Revelries. Fucking awesome site. Seriously, go check it out. He does a lot of reviews of various occult fiction and occult books. And it's hilarious. Yeah. I'll include a link in the show notes. Yeah. There's some food for thought. Go and marinate on that. And as far as I know, if everything goes right, then next week should be embarking upon the multi-part series that will explore the various facets of human sexual encounters with the otherworldly. Seen through various facets of belief through the ages, all the way back to the Nephilim and before that. Coming forward to today's hybrid alien theories, spectrophilia, and various modern-day folklore and interpretations of offspring between humans and non-humans. We're even going to include a straight-up sensationalist, saucy, tabloid rag run-through various modern claimants, people who have had sex with aliens. It's very strange. It's weird how embedded it is into all of our modern culture. Just kind of overlooked. I don't know. Not a lot of people bring it up. But it's ever present. It's weird. Yeah. Ghosts, angels, demons, aliens, ultra-terrestrials. They be getting it on. Woo-wee! So yeah. Hope you guys enjoy the show. Tune in next week. We start our series on that. And yeah, that's going to do it for today. Thanks for listening. My name is Michael Luck. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And thanks for listening. Really appreciate you guys. Love you all. See you next week. Peace. Peeps.